part 1 of part 2 of Trilby. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Estelle Jobson. Trilby by Georges du Maurier, part 2, part 1. Dieu qui fait bon la regarder, la gracieuse bonne et belle, pour les grands biens qui sont en elle, chacun est prêt de la louer. Nobody knew exactly how Svengali lived, and very few knew where or why. He occupied a roomy, dilapidated garret, or sixième, in the Rue Tireliard, with truckle bed and a pianoforte for furniture, and very little else. He was poor, for in spite of his talent, he had not yet made his mark in Paris. His manners may have been accountable for this. He would either fawn or bully, and could be grossly impertinent. He had a kind of cynical humour which was more offensive than amusing, and always laughed at the wrong thing, at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and his laughter was always derisive and full of malice, and his egotism and conceit were not to be borne, and then he was both tawdry and dirty in his person, more greasily, mattedly unkempt than even a really successful pianist has any right to be, even in the best society. He was not a nice man, and there was no pathos in his poverty, a poverty that was not honourable, and need not have existed at all, for he was constantly receiving supplies from his own people in Austria, his old father and mother, his sisters, his cousins, and his aunts, hard-working, frugal folk, of whom he was the pride and the darling. He had but one virtue, his love of his art, or rather his love of himself as a master of his art, the master, for he despised or affected to despise all other musicians, living or dead, even those whose work he interpreted so divinely, and pitied them for not hearing Svengali give utterance to their music, which of course they could not utter themselves. Ils savent tous un peu toucher du piano, mais pas grand-chose. He had been the best pianist of his time at the Conservatory in Leipzig, and indeed there was, perhaps, some excuse for this overweening conceit, since he was able to lend a quite peculiar individual charm of his own to any music he played, except the highest and best of all, in which he conspicuously failed. He had to draw the line just above Chopin, where he reached his highest level. It will not do to lend your own quite peculiar individual charm to Handel and Bach and Beethoven, and Chopin is not bad as a pis-aller. He had ardently wished to sing, and had studied hard to that end in Germany, in Italy, in France, with the forlorn hope of evolving from some inner recess a voice to sing with. But nature had been singularly harsh to him in this one respect, inexorable. He was absolutely without voice, beyond the harsh, hoarse, weak raven's croak he used to speak with, and no method availed to make one for him. But he grew to understand the human voice as perhaps no one has understood it, before or since. So in his head he went for ever singing, 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 as probably no human nightingale has ever yet been able to sing out loud for the glory and delight of his fellow mortals, making unheard heavenly melody of the cheapest, trivialest tunes, tunes of the cafe concert, tunes of the nursery, the shop parlour, the guard-room, the schoolroom, the pot-house, the slum. There was nothing so humble, so base even, but what his magic could transform it into the rarest beauty without altering a note. This seems impossible, I know, but if it didn't, where would the magic come in? Whatever of heart or conscience, pity, love, tenderness, manliness, courage, reverence, charity, endowed him at his birth, had been swallowed up by this one faculty, and nothing of them was left for the common uses of life. He poured them all into his little, flexible flageolet. Svengali playing Chopin on the pianoforte, even, or especially, Svengali playing Ben Bolt on that penny whistle of his, was as one of the heavenly host. Svengali walking up and down the earth, seeking whom he might cheat, betray, exploit, borrow money from, make brutal fun of, bully if he dared, cringe to if he must, man, woman, child, or dog, was about as bad as they make 'em. To earn a few pence when he couldn't borrow them, he played accompaniments at cafe concerts, and even then he gave offence, for in his contempt for the singer he would play too loud, and embroider his accompaniments with brilliant improvisations of his own, and lift his hands on high, and bring them down with a bang in sentimental parts, and shake his dirty mane, and shrug his shoulders, and smile and leer at the audience, and do all he could to attract their attention to himself. He also gave a few music lessons, not at ladies' schools, let us hope, for which he was not well paid, presumably, since he was always without a sou, always borrowing money that he never paid back, and exhausting the pockets and the patience of one acquaintance after another. He had but two friends. There was Gecko, who lived in a little garret close by in the Impasse des Ramoneurs, and who was second violin in the orchestra of the Gymnase, and shared his humble earnings with his master, to whom indeed he owed his great talent, not yet revealed to the world. Svengali's other friend and pupil was, or rather had been, the mysterious Honorine, of whose conquest he was much given to boast, hinting that she was une jeune femme du monde. This was not the case. Mademoiselle Honorine Cahen, better known in the Quartier Latin as Mimi la Salope, was a difty, drabby little dolly mop of a Jewess, a model for the figure, a very humble person indeed, socially. She was, however, of a very lively disposition, and had a charming voice, and a natural gift of singing so sweetly that you forgot her accent, which was that of the tout ce qu'il y a de plus canaille. She used to sit at Carrel's, and during the pose she would sing. When little Billy first heard her he was so fascinated that it made him sick to think she sat for the figure, an effect, by the way, that was always produced upon him by all specially attractive figure models of the gender sex, for he had a reverence for woman, and before everything else he had for the singing woman an absolute worship. He was especially thrall to the contralto, the deep low voice that breaks and changes in the middle and soars all at once into a magnified angelic boy treble. It pierced through his ears to his heart and stirred his very vitals. He had once heard Madame Albani, and it had been an epoch in his life. He would have been an easy prey to the sirens. Even beauty paled before the lovely female voice singing in the middle of the note. The nightingale killed the bird of paradise. I need hardly say that poor Mimi la Salope had not the voice of Madame Albani, nor the art. But it was a beautiful voice of its little kind, always in the very middle of the note, and her artless art had its quick seduction. She sang little songs of Béranger's, Grand-mère, parlez-nous de lui, or T'en souviens-tu, disait un capitaine, or Enfant, c'est moi qui suis Lisette, and such like pretty things that almost brought the tears to little Billy's easily moistened eyes. But soon she would sing little songs that were not by Béranger, little songs with slang words little Billy hadn't French enough to understand. But from the kind of laughter with which the points were received by the rapins in Carrel's studio, he guessed these little songs were vile, though the touching little voice was as that of the seraphim still, and he knew the pang of disenchantment and vicarious shame. Svengali had heard her sing at the Brasserie des Porcherons in the Rue du Crapaud Volant, and had volunteered to teach her, and she went to see him in his garret, and he played to her and leered and ogled, and flashed his bold, black, beady Jew's eyes into hers, and she straightway mentally prostrated herself in reverence and adoration before this dazzling specimen of her race, so that her sordid, mercenary little gutter-draggled soul was filled with the sight and the sound of him, as of a lordly, godlike, shawm-playing, cymbal-banging hero and prophet of the Lord God of Israel, David and Saul in one. And then he set himself to teach her, kindly and patiently at first, calling her sweet little pet names, his Rose of Sharon, his Pearl of Babylon, his Cassel-eyed little Jerusalem skylark, promised her that she should be the queen of the nightingales. But before he could teach her anything, he had to unteach her all she knew. Her breathing, the production of her voice, its emission, everything was wrong. She worked indefatigably to please him, and soon succeeded in forgetting all the pretty little sympathetic tricks of voice and phrasing Mother Nature had taught her. But though she had an exquisite ear, she had no real musical intelligence, no intelligence of any kind except about sous and centimes. She was as stupid as a little downy owl, and her voice was just a light native warble, a throstle's pipe, all in the head and nose and throat, a voice he didn't understand for once, a thing of mere youth and health and bloom and high spirits, like her beauty, such as it was, beauté du diable, beauté damnée. She did her very best, and practised all she could in this new way, and sang herself hoarse. She scarcely ate or slept for practising. He grew harsh and impatient, and coldly severe, and of course she loved him all the more. And the more she loved him, the more nervous she got, and the worse she sang. Her voice cracked, her ear became demoralized, her attempts to vocalize grew almost as distressing as Trilby's, so that he lost his temper completely, and called her terrible names, and pinched and punched her with his big bony hands, till she wept worse than Niobe, and borrowed money of her, 5-franc pieces, even francs and demi-francs, which he never paid her back, and browbeat and bullied and bully-ragged her till she went quite mad for love of him, and would have jumped out of his 6th-floor window to give him a moment's pleasure. He did not ask her to do this. It never occurred to him, and would have given him no pleasure to speak of. But one fine Sabbath morning, a Saturday of course, he took her by the shoulders and plucked her, neck and crop, out of his garret, with the threat that if she ever dared to show her face there again, he would denounce her to the police, an awful threat to the likes of poor Mimi la Salope. For where did all those 5-franc pieces come from, with which she had tried to pay for all the singing lessons that had been thrown away upon her? Not from merely sitting to painters, Thus the little gazelle-eyed Jerusalem skylark went back to her native streets again, a mere mudlark of the Paris slums, her wings clipped, her spirit quenched and broken, and with no more singing left in her than a common or garden sparrow, not so much. And so no more of La Petite Honorine. The morning after this adventure Svengali woke up in his garret with a tremendous longing to spend a happy day, for it was Sunday and a very fine one. He made a long arm and reached his waistcoat and trousers off the floor, and emptied the contents of their pockets on to his tattered blanket. No silver, no gold, only a few sous and 2-sous pieces, just enough to pay for a meagre premier déjeuner. He had cleared out Gecko the day before, and spent the proceeds, 10 francs at least, in one night's riotous living, pleasures in which Gecko had had no share, and he could think of no one to borrow money from but little Billy, Taffy, and the laird, whom he had neglected and left untapped for days. So he slipped into his clothes, and looked at himself in what remained of a little zinc mirror, and found that his forehead left little to be desired, but that his eyes and temples were decidedly grimy, wherefore he poured a little water out of a little jug into a little basin, and twisting the corner of his pocket-handkerchief round his dirty forefinger, he delicately dipped it and removed the offending stains. His fingers, he thought, would do very well for another day or two as they were. He ran them through his matted black mane, pushed it behind his ears, and gave it the twist he liked, and that was so much disliked by his English friends. Then he put on his beret and his velveteen cloak, and went forth into the sunny streets with a sense of the fragrance and freedom and pleasantness of Sunday morning in Paris in the month of May. He found little Billy sitting in a zinc hip bath, busy with soap and sponge, and was so tickled and interested by the sight that he quite forgot for the moment what he had come for. "Himmel! Why the devil are you doing that?" he asked in his German, Hebrew, French. "Doing what?" asked little Billy, in his French of Stratford at Bow. Sitting in water and playing with a cake of soap and a sponge. Why, to try and get myself clean, I suppose. Ach, and how the devil did you get yourself dirty then? To this little Billy found no immediate answer, and went on with his ablutions, after the hissing, splashing, energetic fashion of Englishmen, and Svengali laughed loud and long at the spectacle of a little Englishman trying to get himself clean, tâchant de se nettoyer. When such cleanliness had been attained, as was possible under the circumstances, Svengali begged for the loan of 200 francs, and little Billy gave him a 5-franc piece. Content with this, faute de mieux, the German asked him when he would be trying to get himself clean again, as he would much like to come and see him do it. Demain matin, à votre service, said little Billy, with a courteous bow. What, Monday too? Gott in Himmel! You try to get yourself clean every day? And he laughed himself out of the room, out of the house, out of the Place de l'Odéon, all the way to the Rue de Seine, where dwelt the man of blood, whom he meant to propitiate with the story of that original little Billy trying to get himself clean, that he might borrow another 5-franc piece, or perhaps 2. As the reader will no doubt anticipate, he found Taffy in his bath also, and fell to laughing with such convulsive laughter, such twistings, screwings, and doublings of himself up, such pointings of his dirty forefinger at the huge naked Briton, that Taffy was offended, and all but lost his temper. What the devil are you cackling at, sacred head of pig that you are? Do you want to be pitched out of that window into the Rue de Seine, you filthy black Hebrew sweep? Just you wait a bit, I'll wash your head for you. And Taffy jumped out of his bath, such a towering figure of righteous Herculean wrath, that Svengali was appalled and fled. Donnerwetter! He exclaimed, as he tumbled down the narrow staircase of the Hotel de Seine. What for a thick head! What for a pig-dog! What for a rotten, brutal, verfluchte Kerl of an Englander! Then he paused for thought. Now will I go to that Scottish Englander, in the Place Saint-Anatole des Arts, for that other 5-franc piece. But first will I wait a little while till he has perhaps finished trying to get himself clean. So he breakfasted at the Crèmerie Souchet, in the Rue Clopin-Clopin, and feeling quite safe again, he laughed and laughed till his very sides were sore. 2 Englanders in one day, as naked as your hand, a big one and a little one, trying to get themselves clean. He rather flattered himself he had scored off those 2 Englanders. After all, he was right, perhaps, from his point of view. You can get as dirty in a week as in a lifetime, so what's the use of taking such a lot of trouble? Besides, so long as you are clean enough to suit your kind, to be any cleaner would be priggish and pedantic, and get you disliked. Just as Svengali was about to knock at the laird's door, Trilby came downstairs from Durian's, very unlike herself. Her eyes were red with weeping, and there were great black rings round them. She was pale under her freckles. Vous avez du chagrin, mademoiselle? Asked he. She told him that she had neuralgia in her eyes, a thing she was subject to, that the pain was maddening and generally lasted 24 hours. Perhaps I can cure you. Come in here with me. The laird's ablutions, if he had indulged in any that morning, were evidently over for the day. He was breakfasting on a roll and butter, and coffee of his own brewing. He was deeply distressed at the sight of poor Trilby's sufferings, and offered whisky and coffee and ginger nuts, which she would not touch. Svengali told her to sit down on the divan, and sat opposite to her, and bade her look him well into the white of the eyes. Regardez-moi bien dans le blanc des yeux. Then he made little passes and counterpasses on her forehead and temples, and down her cheek and neck. Soon her eyes closed and her face grew placid. After a while, a quarter of an hour perhaps, he asked her if she suffered still. Oh, presque plus du tout, monsieur. C'est le ciel. End of part 1, part 2. Recording by Estelle Jobson, Rome, Italy.